Hi, I'm Jackie Garrick. I'm the founder of Whistleblowers of America. I wish I could be with you there today in South Africa for this conference on these very important topics on anti-corruption and whistleblower retaliation and how we need to pull together as a community. But the good news is I can join you virtually with my recorded message. So first of all, thank you for everybody who is there for organizing this meeting. I want to call out June Bellamy, who is the reason I was in South Africa and Johannesburg last year and got to actually meet with several whistleblowers and go to places like the Mandela Institute, Northwest University, met with Ada, got to do a morning radio with Jane Dutton. So we had some really opportunities last spring. I can't believe it was a year ago, as South Africa recognized Human Rights Awareness Month. We were able to have these events. And so I feel like I come to you today with a little bit of an education and a background and a short experience of actually being able to work with and meet with several of the South African whistleblowers, as well as Cynthia Stimple and the Whistleblower House. So again, much appreciation for last year's experiences, and I hope that everyone coming together for the next 2 days gets to enjoy the dialogue. But what I wanted to focus on most is what I work on is whistleblower mental health. And if June is there, she probably has a copy of my book with her, The Psychosocial Impacts of Whistleblower Retaliation, Shattering Employee Resilience and the Workplace Promise. And when we did this book now, it was published in December of 2022, it was to look at the elements of whistleblower mental health. As a whistleblower myself, I didn't find a lot of resources when I first made my disclosure, and I was trying to connect with people who understood this experience. And I was in Washington, D.C. at the time. I was a federal employee, and there really wasn't a lot of resources there for me to learn from, to feel included in. There were law firms. Law firms were expensive. I didn't even know at the time whether or not I needed to hire an attorney. So it was a very confusing time. And then one night I felt like I was having a nightmare. I woke up and I could feel the panic of what I know to be post-traumatic stress disorder. So by background, I'm a social worker. I was an Army officer, and I spent almost 40 years of my career working with veterans. Combat trauma was my specialty, military sexual trauma, suicide prevention. So I had a career built around understanding that type of trauma. So when I started to think about a hostile work environment and retaliation, and needed to explain to a judge in my case what was this animus, and I put the quotes around because animus was one of the words in the law that I found early on. Hostile work environment, animus, reprisal, retaliation. I thought, okay, well, how do we begin to understand what are these words? What do they mean? And how are they impacting mental health? And there was another whistleblower I had connected with early on, and she called it being emotionally gang raped. And that idea stuck with me, that this is really a form of emotional abuse. So I'm going to bring up a slide really quick for a little bit and just sort of talk about what are some of these toxic tactics of retaliation. And I should mention Paul Pearson, who is our vice president, is helping me in the background. So we owe him a little bit of gratitude as well. So when I started to think about these domains, and I call it the Whistleblower Retaliation Checklist, it's what I use when I assist whistleblowers who are taking their cases to court And we have to show that the retaliation was so toxic that there was this nexus to the mental health condition of the whistleblower. So when I started to look at the literature, and again, for what we incorporated in the book, the first domain I felt like we could define through a literature search is the word gaslighting. And I find that in the DSM-5-TR, which is, but for the Americans, the American Psychological Association, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition, text revision is what all that stands for. And I know in South Africa, you're less likely to use the DSM than you are the World Health Organization classification of disease codes, the ICDs. But there's some real similarities between what we use in the US and the World Health Organization. So I just wanted to run through these and then talk about how I see this in trauma intersecting. So what is gaslighting? It literally is trying to make a person think that he or she is crazy. We find this in a description of adult non-partner abuse. That means your employer, your coworkers, non-partner adult abusers are the people you come into contact outside of your home. And where do we spend most of our time? We spend most of our time at work. So gaslighting in the workplace is a classification that I think is something then that we can start to show as provable. Mobbing. Sometimes we've called these people the flying monkeys. They enable the work of the wicked witch. But it is really about the person who is willing to collude with the perpetrators, those that are the most corrupt in an organization. And they're willing to interrogate the whistleblower, stalk them, follow them, which is even outside of work, discrimination, harassment. Those are issues that we see that are covered by other pieces of law sometimes, but are very much related to what I consider to be mobbing and a terminology we've come to use with whistleblowers. Marginalizing. This is when somebody is being humiliated or berated, especially when others can see it. So it's done very publicly. And what I mean by publicly, there are those witnessing it. And that's how you begin to also get people to engage in mobbing, is because they see the whistleblower being mistreated and they're willing to collude with that mistreatment. There's the famous study, whose name escapes me at the moment, where the students are asked by their professor to initiate a shock treatment to other students. Of course, the other students are actors. They're not really being shocked, but people collude. They go along with and they shock these students, even though these actors look like they're in horrible pain, because we accept that a person in authority can get us to do things we might not otherwise think to do, but we feel like this person watching over us, which could be a boss, an elected official. I know in South Africa, we're dealing with state capture, and the fact that the government can be taken over by nefarious actors is really where marginalizing one part of the population helps activate the colluding of another part of the population. So marginalizing in the workplace can be something as innocuous as moving somebody from one office to another, except that the one office used to be a broom closet. It's out in a trailer. It's in a different part of the campus. It's away from the rest of the people at a work site. Maybe they've been put on teleworking status, which might seem like a good thing at some point, but it's a way of shifting them away from where the work is really happening. And it's also a way of keeping them away from emails, meetings, and that that traffic around the workplace that's important for success. So where there's marginalizing, we usually find there's shunning, where the person is isolated from the rest of the group. That's where they start to feel really alienated and removed. And so I've had whistleblowers tell me, like, these were my friends. I've known them for 20 years. We used to go to lunch together, holiday parties, birthday parties, but now nobody even wants to say hi. It's the looking away, the looking at watches, averting eyes, so as not to make any kind of contact with the whistleblower. It's a way of really keeping them off of the radar screen of everybody else. The devaluing is, I think, what most people deal with more formally. It's the actual having a bad performance evaluation, a counseling statement. It's really putting them on notice that they're being watched, that they're being monitored. The double bind is, I always say, this is the tricky one, because it feels like you're going to be restored in some way, but it's also about restricting your access to the proper resources. Again, the language in the DSM is very specific, but this is really about keeping you from being able to perform. So giving you something on one hand, taking it away on the other. In interpersonal relationships, these are the very dysfunctional communications. We often talk about the, if you loved me, then you would know what I wanted from you. And it's really blaming the person who's trying to do the right thing, but taking away their self-efficacy and their ability to really have their own voice and their own opinion. The accusing or the countering or their counter-accusing is also what Jennifer Freed called DARVO, deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender. That's where there's actual threatening to people. South Africa, we've talked about the family of Babita Decaron came to a meeting, or they didn't come physically, but they presented at a meeting we just had in Greece with Ari Donikis, who I think is also presenting at this conference. We talked about that serious, credible threat of being hurt that causes people to go into exile, go into hiding, they move, they get disguises, they change their hair color. It's a very frightening experience to be accused. And then, of course, if it's very public, it becomes even more frightening, because complete strangers now all of a sudden have an opinion about you as the whistleblower, and there are death threats and other types of verbal abuse that happen in the cyber world, which is part of the bullying that I'll get to in a second. Blocking is that obstructing your ability to compete for a job, obstructing your ability to access assistance. In whistleblower cases, it's mostly a job, but it's also sometimes benefits, health insurance, healthcare, being able to move freely. So that blocking, mostly we're talking about, not being able to get another job, but it can be about other things as well. And then the bullying, as I mentioned, is really an actual physical threat of harm, but a serious threat. In when we look at how we define that in a psychological terms, it also does include emotional abuse and psychological harm, feeling unsafe everywhere you go. So as I go through this list of these whistleblower retaliation checklist tactics, I also am mindful that these things then connect in to actual psychological diagnoses and conditions. And for things like post-traumatic stress disorder, if you've been a victim of gaslighting and now somebody's got you ruminating, you're going to have intrusive thoughts about the events. You're going to have maybe flashbacks and feel like you're actually reliving an experience. You're going to have nightmares. I mentioned having a nightmare about these perpetrators and what they were doing and what they were getting away with. And, that spiraling feeling that you have when you know that they're getting away with it and you can't stop them. So then we'll see other symptoms like alienation and isolation that comes from being shunned, where emotionally the whistleblower really starts to shut down and feel numb and not be able to want to connect. And we call that dysphoria or anhedonia. That's also very common with depression and not wanting to go out, fearful of going out, but then feeling like it's too overwhelming to want to leave your home. And that social anxiety that also comes with some of these tactics like being mobbed and marginalized. You just don't even want to leave your house. And there are things that could be very triggering. We use the word triggering a lot with whistleblowers because these memories or these situations cause you to feel real panic. And I've seen where whistleblowers can have panic attacks where you just feel like your emotional state, your heartbeat, you're palpitating, you can't catch your breath, you feel like you're going to pass out, your mouth gets really dry, you get dizzy, you can't see straight, you have some of that somatic symptoms occur where you physically feel the anxiety and the stress. And we know that things like autoimmune disease, gastrointestinal disorders, musculoskeletal, arthritis, that physical pain manifests in the body for whistleblowers. I've even seen some research that relates certain cancers to being triggered by stress hormones in the body. So we know that there is also an association with morbidity and mortality in some of these health conditions, so that whistleblowers suffering from retaliation are and can suffer from PTSD, especially if they're spiraling, they don't get treatment, and they're left unassisted. So I always encourage people, Whistleblowers of America is a peer support network. We try to do a lot of peer-to-peer psychoeducation, connect people with resources. But I'm also aware that when we did the book, when Martina and we ran a survey, which was the background for getting to those domains of retaliation, that we saw that 50% of the respondents to our survey endorsed some level of suicidal ideation. And I know in the US, suicide is the fourth leading cause of death among working-aged adults. And I believe when I was in South Africa, there was some concern about the rates of suicide among whistleblowers there. So I'm going to hold because I promised that I would only be about 15 minutes, and I think I'm about at that point now. If anybody wants to reach me, it's Jackie@whistleblowersofamerica.org. Our website is www.whistleblowersofamerica.org. Please feel free to reach out, and thank you for including me in this wonderful conference.